like a bridge over troubled waters. Last year, I think now it's almost 2 years ago, I woke up during the night and I saw the word bridge, like in Be the Bridge, but it was an acronym. It was BRIDGE, Beyond Racial and Religious Intolerance, Demonstrating God Everywhere. I think that's the bridge we're meant to be, beyond any kind of intolerance. And most intolerance, if you trace it far enough, has roots in racism or religious, some sort of belief. I'm sure there's other, but it's about demonstrating this greater possibility of what it means to be able to disagree, to think differently, but still never to disgrace, to not disrespect, to never cross that line of human dignity. And I truly believe that's what you're at least aiming to do, is to live in that, where we don't trespass that line, that we never cross that line of human dignity and respect. And so I think we're here to be that bridge. Can we count you in on that? Yeah. So we're in the midst of a series. This is week 4, I believe. Last service we debated if it was 4 or 5. I said, we're in the middle of a 7-week series that we're so lost in. It doesn't matter what week it is, but it's based on a brand new book that came out September of this year by Dr. Brené Brown, who is a social scientist. She is a professor at a university in Houston. She has her doctorate in social work. She had a TED Talk that is one of the top 4 most watched in the whole world. She's an incredible, masterful teacher. And I think a very timely prophetess, if you will, for our time, that she's bringing she's calling us into some difficult conversations. She said that she and her editor said this book would have better been titled How to Piss People Off and Lose Friends. That it really does. It's not easy to practice, because it's filled with there are 4 calls to action for how to really, what she calls, brave the wilderness. And by that, it's what I would say by being the bridge, being that voice that is standing up, speaking up, showing up for what is right. But a lot of people who stand up, speak up, show up, and talk the loudest don't have everybody's best interest in mind. Have you noticed that? And so we need individuals that are willing to stand up, speak up, show up, who stay grounded and rooted in dignity and respect and common caring, and in genuinely seeking what is highest and best for all, for our planet, for all creation. And that's our intention here, is to call ourselves deeper into that. So that's what this book is about, Braving the Wilderness. Last week, the first call to action, the practice that she offered, is that people are hard to hate close up, move in. And that's a multi-layered teaching, because, it means really getting to know people, seeking to understand what they're trying to say. And even when they're not willing to cooperate, it's about moving in deeply enough within yourself that you're not creating enemies, that we're not creating more damage, but instead that we're being this bridge. So that was last week. Today, I'm going to read it once, but the exact title of the second call to action is Speak Truth to Bullshit, Be Civil. Now, don't tell my mother I said that in church. She'd be very upset with me. So we're going to say, speak truth to BS, be civil. But you know what that is. It's not belief system. This is the BS that people spread around and you can get knee deep in. So we're going to dig into, why is she saying this? Why did she make it a chapter title? And now the worst talk title I've ever put out there. To speak truth, to BS, and be civil. There's kind of 3 pieces in that. So to begin, is really to take just a moment and to consider, what does it mean to speak truth? First of all the great teachings. A few weeks ago, we looked at the 4 agreements by Miguel Ruiz, and one of those are be impeccable with your word. I've talked many times about the power of our words, and you find that in sacred text from Muhammad to Buddha to Jesus to the Hawaiians, that our words, that there's power. It's the power to create. And so to speak truth is something that we're called to do, to be truth tellers. How many of you learned as a little child, tell the truth? You were encouraged, tell the truth. From kindergarten, tell the truth, be honest. It shows up in our personal values. It shows up in our civic commitments, truth-telling. It shows up in our codes of ethics. It shows up in religious teachings. It shows up in spiritual practices. Speak the truth, tell the truth, be honest. It shows up in our courtrooms. You've heard it said, do you swear, say it with me, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Because you know what a half-truth is. And you know what a little bit of truth is. And not to withhold it. So to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So we build our cultures on this. We assume it as a normal standard, that it should be what we get. I mean, I don't know of anyone that has ever put out the call to find a partner and said, I'd love to have someone that's a good liar and very dishonest. Or I'd love to have an employer or an employee who's just very dishonest. Or a politician, or a leader, or a surgeon, or a child care worker. Anything. You know, we do not want, we don't want that. We don't want dishonesty, because sometimes you ask yourself, well, you know, what is truth? How do I understand truth? Well, just turn it around. What is not truth? You can easily identify what is not truth. It's when we're dishonest. It's when we're deceptive. It's when we're misleading. It's when we're BSing. That's not truth. And so we're seeking, the first is to speak truth. Now, the other important thing to realize about truth is there's what we call absolute truth and relative truth. The scriptures say, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Well, that's talking about one truth. It's talking about if you know the truth of who you are as an expression of all that is, if you know the truth of who you are as a spiritual being, that's the key to freedom. That's the ultimate truth that we could say. So there are every other truth is relative. I mean, there's my truth and there's your truth. And as we all know, my truth is always right? It's like your truth, if it's your is the my, it's like, well, it was true for me, that's my truth. So truth is a relative thing. And it's not always black and white. For example, are people good or bad? Yes. Is change good or bad? Is nuclear power good or bad? Well, the question, in my opinion, is both. People can be good and bad. Change can be good or bad. Nuclear medicine, nuclear energy can be very good, and nuclear power can be used for purposes of evil. So you see that it's not just a cut and dry yes or no. That our conversations, in many ways, when we're saying speak truth, first of all, becomes a willingness to understand that truth is relative. You know, it's like a police officer that would go to the scene of an accident and talk to 3 different people. They're going to get 3 different versions. It's like the story of the blind men who all reached in to touch the elephant to describe it. One describes the trunk, one describes the leg, one describes the tail, one describes the thickness of the side. That's their relative experience of the truth. So when we say speak the truth, it's the willingness to hold it gently and the courage to share authentically your truth, your best understanding of the truth. Always being mindful that the other person's experience of truth may be very, very different, but it doesn't make it any less valid. And so as we begin to soften up and hold it, soften within ourselves, do our best, but then to just be very gentle when it comes to how we are being in relationship to truth as a whole. So to speak truth. When she says speak truth to BS, speak truth, this becomes a real call to action. It's really to speak up. Many of you remember that this year, our theme is our love is power, and our power is love. Stand up, speak up, show up. We had a whole summit on this in June. Our love is power, our power is love. Stand up, speak up, show up. It's based on this idea and this pledge that says, I stand as an ambassador, advocate, and activist for the sanctity of all life. I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper. I am keeper of the earth and all sentient beings. I commit to turn up the volume of love, dignity, and respect for all. I commit to stand up and take loving action as needed. I will not become numb or disconnected or pretend that I don't see the harm or the wrongdoing. I will not remain silent. I will not remain silent when love needs a voice. Not only do I proclaim a belief of inclusivity and love, I am now championing our emerging world of a beloved community. I will stand up, I will speak up, I will show up. You can hear the energy of it, how this is rooted in love and dignity and respect, and it's still very much a call to action, which is exactly what Brené Brown is tapping into. It's this same sort of conundrum to stay connected, to be the presence of light and love in our world, and to be the voice that sometimes feels like the voice in the wilderness, sometimes feels like the only one speaking out or speaking up. And that's not an easy place to be. And yet, that's what we're called to be. Because if we're called to be the light of the world, remember what Jesus said, don't put a bushel, don't cover it up. You can't hide it. And that's very much about our voice. We can't just silence and not speak up. One of the things that I think about in this situation is we can't expect people to speak up if we're not willing to do the same. There's a story about a woman and her husband, and they started squabbling at breakfast one morning, just clashing heads. And so that was it. They both puffed off in their other direction and weren't talking to each other all day long. No one was going to break that silence. They're not talking. They're giving each other the silent treatment. Bedtime rolls around. They're still not budging. Well, the husband realizes he needs to be up at 5 a.m. the next morning to get on a flight to go out of town. And so he sets his alarm, but often that doesn't wake him. And so he wrote a note and left it where he knew his wife would see it. And he said, please wake me up at 5 a.m. So the next morning he wakes up, he looks at the clock, and it's 9:15 a.m. He has missed his flight. He's furious. He looks, and his wife is gone. And he's just, he looks, and there on his pillow is a little note that says, wake up, it's 5 a.m. I like that comical point because sometimes we're wanting somebody to do something. You speak up and do something, and I won't even. So it's a funny way to remind us that when it comes to speaking up, we can't wait for someone else to do the work. We can't expect someone else to speak up if we're not willing to. There's a number of things about silence to me that are very important. Would you give me these slides? Albert Einstein said, if I were to remain silent, I'd be guilty of complacency. Complicity, thank you. Plato said, I shall assume that your silence gives consent. And then that's why Martin Luther King Jr. said, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. It's about being aware of what we are sanctioning with our silence. I remember as a kid growing up, my mother was a bookkeeper for a general contractor and land developer. And so one day she had picked my sister and I up from school. I was a teenager at the time, and she had to go by a job site to drop off some papers. And the foreman, I guess, came to her car, and he had on a hard hat, and the hard hat said, silence is permission. And it caught my attention, and it caught my mother's attention because she said, what in the world does that mean? Silence is permission. And he said, well, we practice safety in the workplace. And so if a person sees something going on and they don't speak up, then they're essentially giving it permission to keep going on. And I never forgot that as a kid, that silence is permission. That when we're not speaking up, our Buddhist friends, when they talk about being mindful communication is to ask yourself, is it kind? Is it true? Is it necessary? Well, quite often, much of what we say is absolutely not necessary because it's not kind, it may not be true, and it's certainly not helpful or relevant. But quite often as well, when we ask ourselves, is it kind, is it true, is it necessary? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt your heart was about to beat out of your chest because you knew you needed to say something, but you were scared to speak up? Well, it's normal, it's natural, but we're being called to walk with that fear, to walk with that beating heart, that when it's necessary, when we are the voice that is in the room, if it's something that we're hearing, if it's touching us, if it's people that's speaking on our behalf, I believe it's up to us to hold them accountable. Because if you're speaking on my behalf and I am just not paying attention, then I'm not being responsible. I'm denying my ability to respond. And so can you see how it can ruffle feathers, and it can be like, oh, it's just too hard to speak up, to speak truth. And in particular, she's saying, speak truth to BS. There's a lot of BS going on right now. So much so that I wanted to understand it. She writes about it, but I wanted to understand it a little bit more. So I literally Googled, what is BS? Over 71 million results came up. There's a lot of people talking about BS out there. There's a lot written on it out there. 71 million, over 71 million. I looked at the zeros several times to think, wow, there's a whole science behind it. Who knew? And I'm not BSing you. It's out there. And so what she's talking about here is that she cites the work of Harry Frankfurt, who's an emeritus philosophy professor at Princeton University, making a real distinction between lying and what he would call BS, or just spinning stories. Have you noticed that when someone does that, it just takes more energy to try to explain it, that you just typically give up and walk away? Well, there can be an intentionality about that, because BS is self-proclaimed truth based on nothing solid. It's speech that is designed to impress or persuade, but with a blatant disregard for truth, factual evidence, or logical coherence. And so it happens a lot. And what's tending to happen, unfortunately, is it's becoming the norm. Nowadays, the internet, through the wonderful internet worldwide, we can connect and communicate with people all over the world. And it means that anybody from anywhere that can get on a computer all of a sudden has a platform. You now have a platform to put your message, your thoughts out there. And so people all over are doing that and reading things and passing them along. And so we're bombarded with ideas and opinions and all of this conversation. And apparently the Russians may even be on it. I guess the jury's still out on that. But it just seems like there's an awful lot of stuff that is confusing. And in the midst of that, unfortunately, it begins to feel like the norm. People become less trusting and begin to feel like there's nothing, I don't know what to do. There's nothing I can do about it. Have you felt that? Have you felt that it's just like, oh my God, this is so big, so out of control, what can I do? What we can do is what we can do in our world. It's what you can do in your conversations. It's to hold ourselves accountable. What this is basically saying is don't allow things to go unchecked. Don't allow the stuff you pass along to go unchecked. Don't allow the things you take in and believe to go unchecked. And if I'm in a conversation with someone, it's about developing the conversation, developing the courage. If they begin to share stuff with me that I feel like is disrespectful or absolutely just makes no sense, to be willing to say in a compassionate way, help me understand how you arrived at that. Where did you get that information? can you see how just interjecting that? There's a story in the Bible. It's called The Woman Who Was Caught in Adultery. And it's the story of a woman in the Old Testament who was caught in the New Testament, who was caught in the act of adultery. And it says that her accusers were standing around her with stones. Because according to the law at that time, anyone caught in the act of adultery would be stoned to death. Now, the interesting thing is, it typically takes two people, as I understand it, to commit adultery. But they only had the woman. And so the woman is here, all the men are standing around with the stones, and the law was allowing them to do what they were ready to do. But somebody spoke up. Somebody said, let me ask a question, and begin to sit down and write in the sand. Now, I don't know if he said, Tom, I saw you at the bar. James. I don't know if he started making a list, and they're like, oh, Lord, he knows. But we don't know what he wrote in the sand. We just know he sat down and started writing in the sand and said, wait, let me ask a question. Insert a question. Is there anybody here that has not broken the law? Is there anybody here that's free of sin? If so, be the first one to cast the stone. So someone said something that shifted the energy. One by one, the story says they began to drop their stones, walked away until it was just left Jesus and the woman. And he said, where are your accusers? And she said, there are none. And he said, neither am I. Go and sin no more. Do you see what can happen when one person, that literally saved a life? We teach our children in school, if you witness bullying, speak up. We're called to begin to speak up. Now, speak truth, period, to BS, which means that there's going to be times that not only are we speaking our best understanding of truth, but it means being willing to engage. And don't allow things to go unchecked on your watch. Don't allow things to come into your world. Don't allow people to represent or speak for you or speak to you if you know it's not true. And how do we do this? This is where this is very important. It says be civil. Because this is the key. This is the energy in which we will either make it better or make it worse. For me, being civil is about four things. Being civil for me is, first of all, it's about being calm, being compassionate, being curious, and being courageous. Being calm. You know, calm is something that absolutely comes from within. Calm is like peace. It doesn't depend on external circumstances. The scriptures talk of peace that passes all understanding. When I think of calm, I think of sometimes at the ocean, how you see the waves and the movement and the current. But if you go far enough down, there's a calm. We develop calm when we spend time on our own going into that still small silence. When we learn how to be with our own questions, be with our own truth, hold ourselves accountable. To really begin to stand up, speak up, and show up means a willingness to cultivate an inner state of calm. Now, does that mean when you're called to stand up or stand out, you're going to be calm? Probably not. Your heart's probably going to be racing, your voice may be quivering, your knees may be shaking. But if you have a daily practice of seeking to be in that presence of calm, what you will find is when you step out and when you start, you'll begin to feel that energy. The more you stand up, the more you speak out, it'll be there with you. So the first is to learn to cultivate a sense of calm. There's no way to be a help in a messy storm unless we can cultivate inner calm. The second is compassion. Compassion to me here is key. Because if you're speaking to me compassionately, I can take it in, I can listen. If you're judging me, if you're shaming me, if you're angry, if you're dumping your stuff, we know what that's like. Nobody wants that. And so our goal is to be compassionate with ourselves and to learn to be compassionate with others. Brené gives a really good example of this when she's talking about a young man. She says there was a young man in his 20s who was driving home to see his dad. And he said that while he was driving, he made the commitment, I want to be present to my father, I want to be tolerant, I want to be patient, because they had a real history of clashing and not getting along. So that afternoon, the young man arrived, and he was standing in the kitchen with his dad making small talk, and he said, so how do you like the new neighbors, Dad? And his father said, we really like them. We had them over for dinner a couple of times, and we're actually becoming friends. As a matter of fact, they're cooking dinner for us this week. They're Oriental, and she's going to make her special dumplings, so your mom is really looking forward to it. And the young man said it just irritated him, and he ripped right into his father. Oriental? Jesus, Dad, are you kidding? Racist much? Before his father could even respond, he went back at him. Oriental is so racist. Do you even know where they came from? There's no country called the Orient. How embarrassing, Dad. He said that rather than engaging, his father stood in the kitchen with his head down. And when he finally looked up at his son, he was teary-eyed, and he said, son, I don't know what I have done to make you so angry. It seems I just can't do anything right. And there was a moment of silence, and then he said, but I have to leave now because I'd stay and let you tell me how much of a jerk I am, but I'm actually taking the neighbor that I supposedly hate up to pick up her husband who had cataract surgery. She doesn't drive, and he took a cab this morning. And the man said that when his dad said that, he just didn't know what to do, and so he just walked out of the kitchen. And they never brought the conversation back up. And Brené said, you know, what if he had approached it like this? What if he just said, you know, Dad, people are not using the term Oriental any longer. I thought I'd let you know. And if he wanted to really be compassionate or empathetic, he could say something like, you know, I'm learning every day too. Language is constantly changing. Can you feel the difference? And she talks about the fact that even in our attempts sometimes to protect people and do what's right, we're going about it in a way that is hurting people, that's embarrassing. And so being compassionate is being willing to ask people, you know, have you thought about it this way? Not everyone's going to respond. That's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is, can we be calm? Can we be compassionate? The second, or the third thing, so calm, compassionate, and the third is curious. Curious. Einstein said, I have no special talent. I only have passionate curiosity. To be passionately curious. The scriptures say, ask, seek, knock. When we can enter our conversations with the willingness to be curious. You see, curiosity is something that helps keep the ego in check, because the ego likes to be right. The ego likes to be prepared and have a case against you. The ego likes to defend. And so curiosity, that's why the scriptures say, become like a little child. There's a story about a little girl. Her grandfather was taking her to nursery school one morning. And she was eating an apple in the back, and she had stopped eating it for a few minutes, and she looked, and it was turning brown. And so she said, Papa, why is my apple turning colors? And he said, well, because you bit the skin of the apple and exposed the flesh. And when you expose the flesh of the apple, it's exposed to oxygen, which oxidized it. And when it was oxidized, the molecular structure of the apple was then able to turn colors. The little girl was silent in a minute, and she says, Papa, are you talking to me? Even a child, when they don't understand, will say, are you talking to me? Or what do you mean about that? Richard, would you give me the song? To be calm, to be compassionate, to be curious. You see, curiosity also helps keep us open, that it's not this or that. One of the things Brené talks about, another characteristic of BS, is when conversations will say, well, it's either this or that. You're either for this or you're against that. And when we do that, we're reducing some very important things into a box that doesn't really represent the issue at hand. And we're creating enemies. And so curiosity helps us engage. Help me understand your point of view. Help me understand how you see this here. She tells a story, a personal story in her book about being at one of her workshops. I'll actually read some to you. She says, late last year, I was talking to a group of people at an event, and I mentioned that my father and I were looking forward to teaching my son how to skeet shoot. One woman looked horrified and said, "Oh my God, I'm very surprised to hear that you're a gun lover. You don't strike me as the NRA type." She said, if you're reading her comment as aggressive and pointed, then I've communicated it accurately. There was contempt and disgust in her face. Hot topic, right? There's a lot of hot topics because they're important topics. Brené says, well, I replied, I'm not sure what you mean by gun lover or the NRA type. The lady sat straight up in her chair and said, if you're teaching your child how to shoot a gun, then I'm assuming that you support gun ownership and the NRA. Brené said, there it was, the false dichotomy. Either this or that. You're either for it or against it. Only two choices. That's not true. She said, I'm not going to buy into this. She said, I took a deep, don't lose your beep breath, smiled and said, you're 1 for 2 on your assumptions. I do support responsible gun ownership. I do not in any way support the NRA just because I support responsible gun ownership. The woman looked mad and confused and said, but with all the gun shootings in schools, I don't understand why you don't support gun control. And Brené said, I said, come on, sister, I do support gun control. She said she went on and tried to engage in the conversation. And she said, because I was already working on this book, I said the thing that I have felt my entire life, but was either too afraid to say or didn't have the words. She said, I knew what I could have said that would have made me the hero to that crowd. I could have easily just got off the subject. I knew they did not want to talk about gun control, and they did not want to have an awkward conversation about it. You could feel it. And all the times in the past, I would have just said what needed to be said or just remained quiet to just get off the subject. But she said something now. She's writing this book. Right at the chapter she's writing, Speak Truth. Have you noticed how the universe sends you those things? So she said, I know this is a hard and heartbreaking issue, but I don't think you're hearing me. I'm not going to participate in a debate where the issue is reduced to you either support guns or you don't. It's way too important. If you want to have a longer conversation, I'm happy to do that. And I wouldn't be surprised if the same issues make us both angry, scare us both. She said the woman stomped off, and she said the woman may not like me, the people may not have liked me. She said I felt alone in the wilderness, but it was okay. I may not have been liked, and it didn't feel great, but I was in my integrity. I love that example. And, we all have different opinions and take different stands on these issues. Well, the point is, can we make the conversations bigger by being calm, compassionate, curious, and the last one, courageous? Can you see how it took courage to do what she did? It doesn't necessarily mean that she won any friends, hence the name of the book, the name of the book, How to Tick People Off and Lose Friends. But I believe that we are feeling, can you feel that this is being called for? That it's really time for us to stand up, speak up, show up, being that presence of calm, of compassion, of curiosity, and of courage, to honor the divinity, to honor the dignity, and to be willing to get to the heart of these issues so that we can create and be the change that we wish to see. Are you ready to speak truth? To speak truth to whatever comes up before you, and to be civil. Yeah. So Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. The prayer of St. Francis. Lord, your peace, of your peace. So I invite you to close your eyes. Make me an instrument of this peace. We recognize that we are given a voice. We're also well aware how our voice is connected to our power center. We say things like, I have butterflies in my stomach. My knees are weak. Our body literally demonstrates physical symptoms when we're starting to put ourselves out there. Public speaking is the #1 fear in the United States. Putting ourselves out there feels very risky. It makes us feel vulnerable. And it is a demonstration of vulnerability, but not a vulnerability born of weakness, but a vulnerability that is born of wholehearted living. A vulnerability that says, I will show you my heart. I will share with you my understanding of truth. And I will be open and present and seek to understand what you'd like for me to understand. The body has these physical symptoms because it knows that you're putting yourself out there, which means you're putting your presence out there, which means you're putting your God-given power out there. That's what we're called to do, to show up. That when we feel these sensations, these are the most important times for us to be willing to put ourselves out there. And so we seek to do this in a way that is calm, that is anchored in the intentions of being calm. And even if I have butterflies and I'm shaky and I'm not calm at the moment, I set my intention for the spirit of calmness to come through. And I anchor it in the intention of compassion. Let me express in the spirit of love and connectivity, and give me the courage to understand differing opinions. We do it in the spirit of curiosity, remembering that there's always more to learn. That when we're willing to be with the question, to hang out in the unknown, that's where the opening is created. The Buddhists call it penetrative insight. To hang out in the unknown, to stay in the question long enough to pierce the veil, to create the opening for the insight to come through. May we befriend curiosity and courage. That courage that shows up as the lion and the lamb. That courage is that part of us that will make us stand up, speak up, show up. That protective side. But courage is also the face of the lamb that knows when to be quiet and that knows what it is to get up and try again tomorrow. That's courage. This week, I become more willing than ever to speak truth, to be that presence, that voice, in a way that is civil, calm, compassion, curious, and courageous. For this is the recipe for change, to be the change we wish to see. I invite you to put one hand on your throat and one hand on your solar plexus area, that place where you may feel butterflies sometimes. May we be aligned in spirit and in truth. May the courage of our heart, the beauty of our soul, rise up and shine through our eyes, through our voice, through our presence. May we be mindful of the words we entertain, the thoughts we entertain. May we recognize that our thoughts are not always that thoughtful, and our words are not always that thoughtful. And so we choose to bring awareness. We choose to bring our whole heart. I rededicate and reactivate my God-given gifts of voice, presence. As you return your hands to whatever space is comfortable for you, we create this space together, a sacred space that we now hold in prayer, those things that we're holding in our heart. If there's an individual, a situation that you're holding in prayer, I invite you to speak it into this sacred space. And we see those aligned with the truth of their being. For those that are still in the midst of recovering from the challenges of earthquakes and fires and tornadoes and hurricanes. To those who have physical challenges, relationships, financial, peace of mind, whatever it may be. We see the remedy for all of this as first and foremost our willingness to show up for one another as the light of the world and to hold that light for each other. So for this sacred time, we are truly grateful. We bless and we seek to be a blessing. Make us an instrument. And Lord, make me an instrument of your love. Lord, make me an instrument of your love. Lord, make me an instrument of your love, of your love, of your love, of your love. I invite you to stand up with me. Your light. And Lord, make me an instrument of your light. Lord, make me an instrument of your light. We sing, Lord, make me an instrument of your light, of your light, of your light, of your light, of your light. This time, let's sing truth. And Lord, make me an instrument of your truth. Lord, make me an instrument of your truth. We sing, Lord, make me an instrument of your truth, of your truth, of your truth. of your truth, of your truth. One more time. Of your